So what I want to show you guys tonight is how you can make a considerable amount of money on a very small plot of land. So I'm just going to give you my 2012 numbers because with all the government stuff, I don't want to share my numbers too much as I grow for my own selfish purposes. But so I'm basically going to show you how I did $80,000 on half an acre of land. And so we're going to look at my farm, how my farm operates, what we do. We're going to talk about some of the mechanics of spin farming, what that entails, and a little bit about my own personal story. So just to start with that, like Javin was saying, I come from a musical background, actually. I've been trying to make a living as a working musician since the time I was about 12 years old. And I really had a go at it. I moved to a big city in Montreal, and I had a degree in composition, music composition and arranging. And I was like a lot of you guys, where you see all these problems in the world and you get pretty pissed off about them. And you often run into this wall of like, how do I do something about this that's proactive? But better yet, how do I do it and make a living at it? Because I don't want to just be a weekend warrior. I don't want to just be an activist on the weekend and then check my values at the door every time I go to my job. So that was my biggest challenge. So I was on this quest. When I left Montreal, I decided I didn't want to be a working musician anymore because I was getting kind of tired of living in abject poverty. I often tell people, if you think being a farmer is hard, try being a working musician. You want to put in hours and hours of unpaid work and unrecognition? Well, try that. At least that was my experience. I love playing music, don't get me wrong, but to make a living at it was really difficult. So I left Montreal, and I was fed up with what was going on in the world, and I read lots of books about permaculture and earthships and all kinds of things that led me down this rabbit hole of everything. I'd just cruise YouTube and check all this stuff out and was really inspired. And I was a cyclist. I did a lot of riding in the city. So I planned a woofing tour down the West Coast. So I rode all through California. I rode from Kelowna, BC, all the way down to Tijuana, and I just visited organic farms, homesteads, people living off the grid, eco-villages, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't really learn anything about farming in that time, but what I did learn is that when you go out into the world and you wear your values on your sleeve, and you say, this is who I am and these are my values and I'm going to stand by them, people embrace you everywhere. And I honestly, as a Canadian, we get a lot of bad impressions about Americans in America, and I had all these preconceptions, but I have to say, traveling through your country, I was absolutely inspired and by the generosity of people when they could identify where I was coming from. And everywhere I went was serendipitous. So by the time I got down to the south, I stayed in San Diego for a while. My original plan was to go across the west and go and volunteer in the New Orleans relief effort. By the time I got to San Diego, I was just so charged. I was just like physically, mentally, spiritually, I felt like I could do anything. And so at that point, I didn't know I was going to be an urban farmer, but I knew that I had to get back home and figure it out and finally polish out what I wanted to do. So I spent another year tree planting, which is a pretty Canadian job. A lot of students do it, and you can make pretty good money at it. So I saved a pool of money, about $14,000, and I said, I'm going to just go all into something. And a friend of mine mentioned this spin farming thing, and he told me there was a guy making six figures off less than an acre, and I didn't believe that because I'd read John Jevons' book, and I'd read Elliot Coleman, and I was thinking, $20,000 an acre, that's tops what people would do. But I looked into it, and people were doing it. And that's pretty much it. I looked for one piece of land that a friend of mine's family let me use, which is this place here. And I started to develop it in the fall of 2009, just turning up the sod. I had to remediate a lot of the soil there and get it going. And so I gave buckets, ice cream buckets to a bunch of friends of mine to say, just give me your vegetable scraps for the winter and I'll pick them up on my bike. Because I didn't know anything about gardening. I didn't know anything about composting. I just wanted to figure it out. So I spent the winter doing that, and then I launched the farm in the spring. And so Every year that I've done this, it's doubled. So for 4 years in a row, I doubled my gross and I doubled my size. And there's some lessons to be learned in that, is that if I could do it again, I wouldn't grow so fast, because it can really lead to burnout. So this is my 5th year farming. I was at 4 acres last year. I've actually scaled back to 1/3 of an acre. And I farm entirely in an urban environment, and I only grow certain kinds of crops. And I'll talk about that stuff too. Keep in mind with what I'm going to show you, this is A to B stuff. This isn't like, at this conference, we've seen some amazing possibilities of what we can do to remediate soil and damaged landscapes and all these things. And I think we should never lose sight of those things. But often when I look at those big solutions, I go, what's step B? Like, where do I go now? And that's what this is. This isn't the ultimate form of sustainable agriculture. This isn't a way to save the world. But what it is a way to step forward so that you can put one foot in front of the other, make a living doing something you love, build community, build your skill base, and then reinvest as you go, recapitalize as you go. Maybe your end objective is to make a 300-acre food forest. But how do you get there? I don't want to go work on the oil sands in Alberta to get there. I want to get there by doing something positive. So this is A to B stuff. Keep that in mind as we go through all this. And the other thing about this is that this is about cash flow. This is about getting an income right away. I can turn a plot of land from a derelict lawn into a productive site that I'm pulling revenue off in 2 months. And I've turned over 20 plots in the course of my farming career. So this is about getting an income right away, reinvesting as you go. And we often hear in permaculture, we hear the problem is the solution, and it's exactly true. In the US, you guys have 40.5 million acres of lawn. That is a tremendous opportunity that you can farm in a few backyards and make a living at this and make a good living at it. And I won't tell you that the work is easy, but the work is very fulfilling, and you inspire people every day you do it. And you don't have to evangelize anybody because they just see what you're doing. And they go, wow, what a great idea. I want to do that. And it just gets the conversation going, and you feed people, and everything about it is fulfilling. So keep that in mind with the opportunities that we have. So why urban farming? And there's a lot of ways to look at this, but I like to look at it a little bit from a farmer's perspective, is that 2 biggest barriers most young people have today, or most people have today, generally speaking, is access to land and capital. To buy a piece of land, even if you can get land on the cheap, say you can get an acre for $20,000, the infrastructure that you have to put in there to get a commercial operation going with irrigation or wheel lines or whatever it is, infrastructure to process, energy to run your cold storage, all these things. These are big startup expenses. So farming in backyards in the city addresses a lot of these things because you can get land for free, and you don't really have to have a lot of heavy startup because we use really simple tools and have a really low costs. The other thing is proximity to markets. So I'm in the city, I live in the city, my gardens are in the city, people see me and they see what we're doing. I don't have to try to sell any of my stuff. People just poke their heads over the fence and they go, wow, where can I get your stuff? So it makes it really easy to sell. Makes use of these underutilized spaces. We've got all these derelict lawns and just these monocultures of grass that are often just weeds. So now we can go in and utilize these spaces and make them productive and bring people together and feed people. Diverting waste streams is a huge part of the piece of the pie. I won't tell you that my form of farming is a closed loop system. It's far from it. But it's closed loop when you pull the lens back. So, when I came into this wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, it's like, I want to have a completely closed loop system. I want to generate my own energy, generate my own fertility, and all these things. But you just got to pull the lens back a little bit and see the greater picture in the community and, bring in these waste streams from restaurants. And that's what we do. Every time I deliver to a restaurant, I take all their cuttings, all their vegetable cuttings, and that makes my compost. That's my fertility. And again, reconnecting community to the food. and bringing local food back to be visible to people. And that's really the basis of an alternative economy. If you want to talk about local economics, without a strong food system, you can't really go anywhere else with it. So our farm is now 1/3 of an acre. So that's just 15,000 square feet. This is very small. It's multi-locational. There's multiple plots. I'll fire through some of those coming up here. When I started the farm, I did everything by bike and trailer. So I had custom-built steel frame trailers, and I had these long-tail extra cycle bikes. That's how I started. It was very cheap to operate, and I didn't really have to burn a lot of fuel to do it. But I burned a lot of calories, I'll tell you that. We mostly sell annual vegetables, and that's because they're a fast turnover. I want to be in cash flow and getting a return immediately. And we sell primarily through direct consumer markets, so I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with those, CSAs, farmers markets, restaurants. I'll mention some other market streams that I have as we go through. I operate 10 to 12 months of the year, but now I'm leaning towards only operating 8 months of the year because I really like the off-season. And if I can make more in 8 months than 10, I would rather do that. So in 2012, myself and one part-time employee, we did 80,000 on a half an acre. And yeah, he was just part-time, whereas myself was working between 40 to 60 hours a week. 60 in the summer, 40 in the rest of the season, really. This is my backyard, 2 50-foot by 18-foot high tunnels, unheated greenhouses. My property alone with my front backyard, an inside area where I grow microgreens, can generate about $35,000 a year. I don't have to leave my home. This is a processing area, very DIY infrastructure, simple stuff. So I process vegetables here, wash totes, what have you. This is inside one of the greenhouses. I really have always taken the idea from permaculture of stacking functions. This is stacking functions literally. Microgreens on a T-bar with wood planks that hangs above the crops below. I only do this in the shoulder season when the sun's lower in the sky, so this doesn't shade out the crops at all. So I'm getting $15 a flat of microgreens every 10 days, plus $200 to $300 per cut of each of those greens in there. This is a front yard plot. I'll talk about this plot a little bit more as we go forward and explain to you how you can make $10,000 on 2,000 square feet. I'll break down those metrics for you. Backyard plot, similar thing. Most of my plots are between 2,000, 3,000. Some of them are 5,000 square feet. This is another front yard plot in a very high-trafficked area. It's right by the Kelowna General Hospital. This plot's kind of funny because I really got into this for outreach. I wanted to just show people about urban farming and educate them about food and all this kind of stuff. And it happens every time I'm there because I cannot be in this yard without having at least 5 conversations with people. And when you're so busy, you're kind of just like, man, I just want to get some work done, but everybody keeps talking to me, so I got to go in there early in the morning, get things done, and just sometimes get out of there. But really, when I look at it from a little bit further away, I think how fantastic is that I get to go to work and people just tell me all day how awesome it is what we're doing and how we've inspired them to garden themselves. So really tough life. This is an indoor microgreens area, but it also doubles as an early season nursery. I mean, I am in a high desert, so I have sometimes pretty cold winters, but I have really hot and dry summers. So sometimes even in the summer, I'll do microgreens in this because I can control the environment better. One of these units here doing microgreens can generate about $1,500 a week in revenue if you can sell the stuff. If you have a market for the stuff, the sky's the limit with these things. Verticalizing, I mean, this is just 400 square feet. At full production, when I was doing microgreens as a really big part of my operation, we were doing up to $3,000 a week year-round with this kind of thing at about 20 hours of labor. But it's if you can sell the stuff. And I mean, crops like this are high risk too because they're part of food trends. Chefs like things that are hip, and sometimes those trends pass, and then there's something else. And so that's kind of happening with microgreens. The market's becoming kind of saturated, so they can be risky but highly profitable. This is just a shade tunnel. In the summer, I throw shade cloth on these greenhouses so that I can do greens without them bolting in the summer, and it's makes for a more consistent crop. This is just another backyard plot. These little hoops you see there are a really simple, low-cost way of doing season extension. And basically, with all the beds on my farm, I'll explain how beds work and all that. with our farm, but I can have my entire operation under poly and season extension at a 20th of the cost as what it would be to build greenhouses. So there's advantages to greenhouses in the sense that you have a higher air volume and there's not as much fluctuation in the temperature, but these, for certain crops, work really well, and they're mobile. So you don't have to leave them there permanently or invest in infrastructure that you might have to pull out. So our farm has a very tiny footprint. Like I said earlier, I used to do everything by bicycle and trailer. But as I grew, it was really hard to keep doing that because I was sometimes pedaling up a hill with 200 pounds of produce in a trailer in the middle of summer and sweating my ass off and showing up into these white, like everybody's in whites in these high-end restaurants. I'm this like sweaty pig coming in with, produce that probably should have been outside too long. So I had to just start using a vehicle. So I use one of these right-hand drive Japanese imports that are really cheap on gas. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a hybrid electric bike. I have 2 of them. Get sponsorships from bike shops. That's what I got. So I got a lot of this stuff for free. Average food miles. I mean, you guys have heard this stuff before, but our goal is the tiniest footprint as possible. Burning calories, not really burning a lot of fuel. So for all the land I use, none of it is on a cash basis. So the beauty of this is I don't really have a lot of operational expenses. I don't pay anything for my land. Everything's just on trade. So I feed the people that give me the land, and they let me use it. I do all the work. All I need from them is access to their faucet. And that's the beauty of farming in a city is you don't have to worry about hooking up your irrigation in the spring and is there going to be runoff from the cattle ranch upstream or whatever it is. It's just plug into the tap and it's good to go. So it's really simple. Our landowners get a box of produce. They essentially become members in a CSA. So we feed them for 8 months of the year. They don't have to do anything. They just let us do our work and have a beautiful garden in their yard, and they get stuff that comes from the entire farm, not just what's on their plot. So we have a list that's as taller than I am of people that are just begging us to use their property. And that's one thing I always tell people is, if you want to do this stuff, just get started and do it. And as you put one foot in front of the other, more opportunities are going to present themselves. And that's how it was for me. At first, I didn't have a lot of opportunities, but now I still get phone calls every week where somebody's like, hey, I've got this place. Do you want to use it? And it's picking the best of the best, really. So it's a nice place to be. But yeah, we have access to hundreds of acres of land, hundreds, because there's so few people that actually know how to farm, but there's so much land out there. And the people that own it usually don't know how to use it. So the great thing about this exchange is that it's a way to include the common person who's not quite ready to quit their job. They can participate in a local food movement, and they can be part of the change, but they don't necessarily have to do all the work. So we grow mostly high-value vegetables. I'm not going to go through all of this stuff in detail, but the idea now is I'm on 15,000 square feet. So for me to grow winter squash, potatoes, and onions, and shallots, and garlic is not economical. I need turnover. I need annual vegetables that grow quickly. So usually things that have a less than 60 date to maturity. So those are the crops that I can keep turning over. I amend my soil and plant more and continuously crop and crop and crop. Yes, there's inputs, but most of those inputs are local waste streams. So there's a list of some of the crops we grow. And we still operate a CSA program. So when we were at 4 acres, we had 60 members, and we grew about 60 to 80 different types of products. Now I have just these. So we run our CSA and keep our customers by collaborating with other farmers. And this is something that I believe that an urban farmer has a role to play in collaboration, because to grow all those crops in the city is not economical, and it's really a lot of work. But it makes sense in your zones. Think about the permaculture zones of intensity. What makes sense to grow closest to where you are? Crops that have high perishability, high value per pound, and things that grow fast, because you can turn them out and get them to market to feed people right away. So that's what we grow. And then I buy in things from other rural farmers that often have a harder time connecting with chefs in the city, because they don't live in the city. I'm in the city. I'm on the scene. I see these guys all the time. I eat at their restaurants. They know me. So I'm a connector. I'm a farmer, but I'm a connector to help all these other farmers sell their stuff. So I'm sure a lot of you guys know about the triple bottom line, but this is basically the fundamental ethos that I follow in our business, is that there's the economic profitability, there's the social impact, and there's the environmental impact. And I probably won't go through all of this because I don't have the time, but the basic idea is it's not about what you make, it's about what you take. And if you are running high cost, high expenditures, at the end of the day, you might only make $20,000. And there's tons of examples of that, of farmers all over the US that have 1,000-hectare monocultures. And their gross is 3 or 4 million. But at the end of all their expenditures, they might take home $20,000. So this is about low-cost DIY infrastructure, being able to get things going quick and get a cash flow return. Trade and barter, that's something I do all the time. And this is the greatest thing about being a farmer, is you have something that everybody needs. So I like to think about economic impact, like what's the best value I can get for my labor? Because money is just essentially economic energy. So when you trade with somebody, you preserve 100% of your economic energy because the deal is just as good for them as it is for me. I don't have to pay taxes on that. There's no inflation. There's no income tax. So it's a way to elevate your quality of life without necessarily making more money or expanding your operation. So that's the sort of the economic idea behind our operation. The social impact is, we're providing food for people right in the neighborhood. Think of a place like in Temecula here with this massive sprawl. And it's almost like a food desert. We have to drive a half an hour just to get to the nearest place to get groceries. Think of the opportunities in these suburban areas where people could start these pockets of farms and giving accessibility to this food in their area. The greening of underutilized space, and there's also such a demand and need for proper education about growing food. People are so disconnected from it this way today, and that's the role of an urban farmer. You're in the city. The education just happens naturally because people come by and they see what you're doing. So it's so easy to incorporate that into your business. And the environmental impact really is minimal fossil use consumption. In 2012, we only burned $200 worth of fuel, and we produced about 40,000 pounds of food. So very, very small impact. Positive soil management, constant organic matter into the soil. I will show you that I do rototill, and I do rototill a lot. But I'm putting in high amounts of organic matter into the soil every time, and I do cover cropping and use green manures when those beds aren't in production. And again, redirecting those local waste streams, taking a problem into a solution. So now I'll go over the basic components of spin farming. So Javin said it, spin farming means small plot intensive. And all this is a methodology on how you can make a profit on a very small piece of land or multiple pieces of land. So there's some fundamental ideas behind it. Also, I do have a book on this. I only brought 20, unfortunately, but it's essentially a business plan. And all this stuff is in there on, it's basically, I took this book without any experience, and I made a profit my first year doing it. So I have 20 of these books. If anybody is interested, just come and talk to me afterwards. So low overhead and startup costs. I started my business on $7,000, and I turned it into $22,000 gross that year. It doubled every year after that. And I did increase my assets as I grew. Standardized bed system. This is really important because this is looking at the bed as a unit of production. It's a unit of economic measure. And so in spin farming, they have basic benchmark figures for that, where it's every bed, no matter what the crop, should be worth at least $100 per harvest. And if it isn't, then it's not worth growing. So that really only excludes winter squash and, forget about commodity crops. But as far as market vegetables, it really only excludes winter squash. So you can still grow a lot of other things. Crop zoning based on the level of participation of the crop. So just like in permaculture with zoning, the plots that I have that are closest to my house, that's where I grow all of my quick growing crops that I need to constantly plant, harvest, and maintain all the time. So I don't want to move around as much because I do have to go from plot to plot. Sometimes I'm a 5-minute bike ride away, or sometimes I'm a couple-minute drive if I have to drive. Relay planting is this idea of you're not just planting out one bed for the season. You're planting a bed, harvesting it, and as soon as it's done, you amend the soil, turn it in, and plant something else. So each of these beds on this picture here sometimes get planted as many as 7 times a season. So I'll break down those metrics as we go forward. Spin has a kind of a creative pricing system where you use one item for $3 and 2 for $5. This is the way when you're at a farmer's market of simplifying how you sell things, and it makes for fast transactions and easier work for you because you don't really have to make change. And people don't think about the individual price of something. They just think, what can I get for 5, 10, 15, or 20 bucks? And so people end up spending more money, and you're kind of fogging the price in a way, but so it's not so much about the individual prices, but what you can get for 5. I won't talk too much about that stuff. I felt it would be valuable to show you the production systems the most, and we can take questions at the end of it, and I can answer whatever you like. So generally, we're focusing on high value, medium value. Maybe medium value crops would be something like tomato and patty pan squash. The high value would be the quickest growing crops with the shortest date to maturity and have the highest dollar per pound, dollar value per pound. And the real important thing about spin farming is a steady cash flow. So it's not about the usual lineage you see on an annual vegetable farm is like a bell curve, where there's a slow start to the season, and then July, August, September production, at least in North America, July, August, September production peaks out, and then it kind of tapers back off in the fall. The problem with that is that when your production peaks out in July and August and September, so is everybody else's. So now you've got an abundance of stuff and an abundance of competition to sell it. So it's important to maintain steady cash flow, and that you get that through crop customizations based on what grows best at each part of the season and what there's demand for. And a lot of that is bioregionally dependent. And then staggering your harvest. So this means you have to use walk-in coolers and commercial refrigeration to be able to stagger what you harvest, so you don't do all of your harvesting on one day. And I'll show you some more of that. So low operation costs. Pretty much the farmers do everything. So this isn't a model where you start your farm and then hire 10 employees. This is a model where you work for yourself because you like doing the work, and you might have 1 or 2 employees. So that's how you keep costs low. Like, labor is probably the biggest allocation of costs on farms, so this is about doing most of the things yourself. Really simple DIY infrastructure. I used to do everything with a mobile. I'd set up my market tent, and I would do all of my processing there, and I'd take it down at the end of the day. Sometimes I would put it at different sites if I had more stuff to harvest at one particular site. But really simple, really cheap. We use small machinery. So on the top right here, that's called a BCS walk-behind tractor, and that's probably the most important tool on your farm to get ground into production quick. You need to have some kind of walk-behind tractor, and these are great because you can change the implements on them. So people who are really interested in no-till methods, there's an implement for this called a power harrow, and it basically just the tines turn horizontally, and they only skiff up the top inch, so you don't have to invert the soil profile. So that's what a lot of long-term organic farmers are doing to maintain a good long-term vision for their soil. Walk-in coolers, that's probably the next big investment that someone would make, a couple $1,000. You can get these for used, and you can see how just everything is all hand tools. A vehicle is kind of like the next thing you need to transport stuff, but I did it by bike for years, and it was really cheap to set up that way. So intensive, what does that mean? So when we talk about farming, we often imagine the rows, right? The big space between the rows, because the tractor has to go along there, and the implements on the back of the tractor need space to cultivate between the rows. So it's a huge inefficient use of space. Not to mention that is when the tractor gets to the end of the rows and it needs to turn around, it needs 20 to 30 feet to actually turn around. So all that space is wasted. And if you're farming organically, and even by a tractor, you got a lot of weeding to do. And you always get weeds blowing in because it's impossible to manage all of them, because all the ones in the perimeter, they all go to seed and blow into your field. So it's actually very inefficient. So when you look at an intensive system, a bed system, I do everything in 30-inch beds, and there's many reasons for that. One is it's simply easy to straddle a 30-inch bed. So it's ergonomically correct. I can walk across my plot and access from each point. So there's time advantages to that, efficiency advantages to that. we have a higher yield per square foot. So if you look at the two pictures here, you can see the amount, how much more head lettuce is in these beds that's concentrated with what you'd have here. And it might be the same spacing in row, but in the beds it's a lot more dense. And the idea is, with the bed, is that once the crop is about 3/4 of the way through its maturity, at that point it shades everything out. So the plants themselves become a mulch. So the plants themselves smother weeds, and they prevent evaporation, soil erosion, and you concentrate more into one area. So even on the labor side of things, it's less physical labor to harvest from a bed that has more crop in a more concentrated area than opposed to walking up and down these long rows. So you actually move less. And so all these things, time management and efficiency, add up when you're running a commercial operation. And if you can save 2 hours a week every week of the year, then that stuff really adds up, and that's what allows you to have a better quality of life and not work so much. Using less or making use of these small spaces. If I were to plan my farm like that everywhere and somebody offered me a 2,000 square foot plot, I wouldn't even make a few $100s on it. It wouldn't be worth it. So you have to compact things into a bed system in order to make use of these small spaces, and that's how that land that's in suburbia becomes available to us, because now 2,000 square feet is actually an economic possibility where you can get a return from it. And of course, in a bed system, there's less soil compaction. I never walk on my beds, right? The walkways are where all the foot traffic happens. The beds never get tampered on. Yes, when I do rototill the beds, there is subsoil compaction that happens, and that's a result of tillage. But you can get a broad fork and go in there and loosen up the subsoil. So you can work around these things. Also, you use less materials in a bed system. So if you're using like a remay cover, or have you seen those cloches, those big white cloches that people cover up fields with? It's a cheaper way to have season extension than a greenhouse. In a bed system, I can use far less fabric to cover more crop than if I was in rows. So it's actually cheaper to run it this way. So just like permaculture, I'll talk about zones. And so when I plan my plots, it's all about zones of intensity. How many times with this one particular plot, how many times are each of these beds going to get planted in the season? Because if it's close to my house, those beds are going to get planted a lot, because I'm going to be there a lot. So I'm only going to grow crops in there that have a date to maturity of 14 to 60 days. And so you might ask me, what has a date to maturity in 14 days? Things like field microgreens that you grow in the soil, often can turn over in 10 days. I'll show you some of that too. So these are just some of the crops that we're talking about. So a semi-intensive area would be crops that had a longer date to maturity. So maybe those beds might only get turned over twice in a season. And then a single crop area would be just, if you were doing longer season crops like onions and garlic. And in the past, I'd done a lot of those things, but I've basically just focused everything down to intensive relay. I took Pareto's law of the 80-20 rule and looked at the 20% that was giving me 80% of my income, and I just said, screw the rest. I'm just going to go with the 20%. That doesn't work for everybody, but it's worked for myself. So this is what these zones look like. This is, in the red area, that's where I live. That's my zone 1. The orange area is my zone 2, so that's where those crops that grow a little bit longer are going to be. And in the third area, that's my longer season stuff. So that third area, I'm only going to that plot once a week. I'll go there to do a bit of weeding in the morning, and then I'll take a harvest home, and that's it. Everything else is on automatic irrigation. I don't have to go back there. Whereas the center circle, I'm at those plots pretty much every single day, and I'm planting out and turning over and cycling beds over every single week. So from the first week of April until the first week of October, I plant 8 to 16 beds every single week. And that's because I've got beds that are being harvested or they're being returned back in, and so on and so forth. So this is what intensive relay looks like. It's just, sometimes it's literally harvesting a crop, amending the soil, compost. Sometimes I use organic fertilizer like bone and blood meal, turn it in, and sometimes I'm planting the same day. So I harvested, and I'm going to plant the exact same day. Ideally, I don't do it that way. Ideally, I do what's called a sterile seed bed technique, where I will till up a bed and water it and let the weeds come, and I'll use a flame weeder to burn the top millimeter of the soil and it kills those weeds, and then I go plant directly into a completely weed-free bed. I'll show you what that looks like too. And again, all this stuff is in the book. If, I have 20 copies, unfortunately, but if anybody wants some, just come and let me know. Appropriate technology and efficiency are super important in running an operation this way. This is a fabulous tool that Johnny's just made that has pretty much saved my life. Bending over, sometimes I do 400 pounds of greens a week, and with 2 guys working, to do all those greens every week was pretty much 2 guys with a full day of work. Now, with this tool, it's basically you attach an 18-volt drill to it, and it has 2 serrated blades that oscillate with each other to cut, and then that thing spinning is like those spinning brushes in a car wash, and they spin and push the greens into the basket. So with this thing, I can harvest 6 pounds of greens in a minute. So this took bending over with knives, nitpicking through here. I'll take questions at the end. It's called the Quick Greens Harvester. So with this thing now, it's just myself in about 45 minutes to 2 hours. I can do all the harvesting of my greens myself. So now I went from needing a lot of extra help with harvesting in peak season to I can manage it all myself. So fantastic time saver. Flame weeding too, same thing. Weeding is often a pretty big allocation of labor for farmers. It's often the same, you'd spend the same time weeding a farm as you would processing vegetables or even going to market. So with this tool and this technique, letting the weeds come and then just burning the top millimeter, it doesn't hurt the soil at all. It just gets those weeds out of the way, and then I don't disturb the soil again, and I direct seed into it. So if anybody's planted carrots before and you see these tiny little guys germinate, how small they are, and if you get weeds in there, it's almost not even worth it. You'd have to just plant something else. But with this, I don't have to do any weeding. And in a city, there's actually a lot less weeds too, because I'm not near big open fields that just have weed seeds blowing in from every angle. So there's less weeds in a city in general, but this makes it where I don't really have to spend any time bending over and pulling weeds. So I want to break down to you guys how some of the basic metrics of this, how the economics of this look. So this is a 2,000 square foot plot. This is basically what most of my plots are around the same size as. So we've got 24 standard beds here. So all my beds are 25 feet long. And that's it's a simple unit of measure. 25, I'll show you some crops as we go forward, but 25 feet of crop in a bed is at least enough that I can sell at a market. And I'm a small farmer. I don't bring $3,000-$4,000 of stuff to a farmer's market. I might bring 1 or 2. So it's a unit of measure that I know I can sell every week. So 24 beds in this plot. If I plant at the lowest possible estimation, if I were to make $100 per harvest of each of these beds and I plant at least 3 beds in a season, that means that this 2,000 square foot plot will generate $7,200 of income. But that's worst case scenario. That's more like looking at a colder climate that might only have a 6-month season. So I live in a high desert. I actually have a pretty solid 8-month season. So some of these plots, these beds get planted up to 7 times. So this number at 12,000 is even relatively low. So that's if I made $500 per bed. But sometimes with the crops, I'll show you, per harvest, I'm making $200 or $300. So sometimes each of these beds are generating up to $1,000 of income when you really lay it out. So this is totally applicable to you guys absolutely in California, but most places in the US. So the costs, what are the costs to set up a 2,000 square foot plot? Basic stuff, right? Irrigation that you're hooking up to the faucet, really low-tech irrigation, nothing really special. I use drip on some crops, but really only for crops that are longer season, because I don't want to have to move drip lines every time I turn a bed over. So I'm more or less just using impact heads and simple irrigation. So this plot, for example, I spent $628 to get everything set up for it, and that's including the cost of turning it from lawn into productive soil. So rototilling that soil up with the grass, keeping that organic matter in place, amending the soil, bringing in compost, bringing in necessary fertilizers if they're needed, the labor to rake rocks out and all that stuff. So that's like the basic cost of that. So $628 cost for $10,000 or $12,000 of profit is a pretty marginal expense. So here's some crops. I'm just going to blast through these. Radishes, a 25-foot bed of radishes. I can pull 75 bunches off $2.50 a bunch. Kale, I can get 200 bunches of kale off each bed over the course of 4 months because you can keep picking kale. So that's $500 a bed. Carrots, I can pull 120 bunches of carrots out of a standard bed, 5 rows of carrots, sometimes 7 rows of carrots. That's $300 for that one crop. So when I give you that metric of $100 per bed, you can already see that it's a very conservative estimate. Even a seasonal crop like patty pan squash, in 134 days, I'm generating 60 pounds per bed, so that's $240. I sell those at $4 a pound. Courgette style baby patty pan squash that go to classy restaurants. And these are the ones where it gets ridiculous. So when you start doing microgreens in the field opposed to in the trays indoors, so I only do this in the summer, but this is a 14 to 10 day turnover. And I plant that crop, harvest it, $15 a pound on a 6-foot bed, I get 10 pounds. So it's $150 off 6 feet in 10 days. It's ridiculous. And the cool thing about this technique is that this is a passive green manure. So if I want to build up organic matter into my soil, I will plant these little 6-foot segments down beds. I'll harvest that crop, let them grow back a little bit, and then turn them in. So then I'm just turning in more organic matter into that soil. And that's what's happened over the years is the organic matter in my soil constantly increases. Leaf lettuce, a similar thing. 15, and leaf lettuce you get multiple cuts from. So I'll go in, I'll cut it once, and then in 7 days it'll be back again for another cut. So I usually get at least 3 cuts per bed. So they just keep producing. So I get 3 cuts per bed. So that means that's about $360 for that one bed. So now I turn it in, amend the soil, plant something else. So if I did maybe I did a root vegetable there, it could be another $200. And then after that, I'd do another quick growing green or something like that. Maybe it's spinach. So you can see how I'm already getting close to $900 for that one bed for a season. So just to break down our revenue stream. So I'm just going to look specifically at 2012. So this is the year where I had the lowest operational costs and did the best based on that. Well, to be honest, I've done better since then, but these are the numbers that I'm going to share with you today. So $80,000 on a half acre in an 8-month season. I hope that by what I've shown you on those plots that you can see how these metrics start to work out. You can see that if you're pulling $12,000 off a 2,000 square foot plot, you might only need 6, 7 of these plots to bring in these kind of numbers. So just break down my costs. So I had a part-time employee. He worked on average 30 hours a week. So in the earlier season, he might only work 10 to 20, but then in the summer, he was there full-time. But on average, it came out to be about $30 a week. I paid him $13 an hour. Our fuel costs for the entire season were $200. So that was just to run my rototiller and sometimes a chipper shredder and maybe a weed whacker if I wanted to weed whack the perimeter of some of my plots. And $2,000 in fertility costs. So like I said, I can't produce all the fertility. Organic or urban agriculture does require inputs. But I buy all my compost from a local guy, a friend of mine, who makes all this stuff, beautiful compost. I can't make compost that good. So I buy it from him. I spend about $2,000 on that. Plus I do use some bone and blood meal every now and then, but not that much. $4,000 in seed. So that's, my annual vegetable seed in there might only be $2,000. The rest of that cost is the cost of my microgreens, which I do use a lot of seed from. So that's about $4,000 for that. I was renting a workshop where I did those microgreens. That cost about $3,600 to rent and the utilities per year. So all in all, around $26,000, $27,000 of expenses on $80,000 of profit. So that means that I'm taking home about 53 grand. So that's about a 66% profit margin. That's really high for farming. And the beauty of this is the smaller you go, the more profitable you get per square foot, the less expense you have to run your operation. So the metrics change. So if I only wanted to farm, say, a fifth of an acre, then my profit margins would be higher. So again, it's not about what you make, it's about what you take. So if my gross is $150,000 or $200,000, but my profit margin is only 40%, I'm probably better off making less money and concentrating on a smaller area and getting more production out of it. So here's a breakdown of where I sell my stuff. So about 50% of what I do goes to restaurants. And that's just based on my bioregion. I'm in a place where there's a lot of high-end restaurants that want my stuff. They love the fact that we ride bikes. They love the fact that we're young. They love the fact that we're riding in or growing in the city. So that it has appeal to them, and they brag about it to their customers. Farmers markets are our next biggest market stream. I love farmers markets. It's basically Farmer Appreciation Day every day. You know, you had a long week working hard in the fields. You go to the farmers market, everybody's thanking you and telling you how great your stuff is and how they love what you do. It's awesome, and it's cash. So, you know, I don't need to explain that one. Our CSA is about 20% of our total sales, and we also sell to a couple organic distributors who buy organic produce. And we're not certified organic. I'll tell you that right up front. We are just non-certified organic because we sell direct to the consumer. We don't really feel we need that certification body. So we sell to these guys that buy our stuff. We give it to them packaged in units just like we take to the farmers market, and they buy from 20 other growers, and then they distribute it all over the region. So they're a good chunk of our sales for one customer. And that's my farm, and that's how I make most of my money. I do a little bit of teaching and consulting and stuff, but it's not put into this metric. I just wanted to show you that there's 7 different revenue streams that I have from this just from being a farmer. And all the education and teaching and consulting stuff didn't come until after. So I'm going to wrap it up here. We can go into questions. And so these are the 5 best pieces of advice. If somebody told me this 5 years ago, I would have shaved at least 2 or 3 years off making mistakes. So the first thing is, if you like what you see and you think you can do this, just do it. You don't need to pursue a degree in urban agriculture. You don't even need to take my workshop. You can, if you are self-driven, I mean, getting a little bit more education here and there doesn't hurt. Some people are more driven than others. That's okay. But the key is just get started. Start with your grandmother's backyard. Start with your friend's backyard. Doesn't matter if it's 500 square feet or it's 5,000 square feet. Just get something going. Because once you get something going, you don't really have to explain to people what you want to do. They just see it. And it's simple to understand. People can see that that's productive. And it's so easy from that point on to sign people up. And then at that point, once you produce one place, you got another place, and now it starts to get exponential where people are just offering you places left and right. So just get going, produce something. Maybe that doesn't even mean you're making an income off it right away. Just get doing it. Produce some surplus, give it to your friends, whatever it is. Start small and grow incrementally. So this was a failure for myself in that I had so much success at this my first year, and I couldn't believe it. And everybody kept telling me, "Man, you gotta grow this. You gotta expand." And I really caved to that pressure. So I doubled it every year. My burnout factor doubled every year too. So I would say start small and really make that 1 or 2 places happen really well, and to the point where you can just generate the most possible production off that one piece of land as you can, and then maybe grow it. But you don't resist the temptation to grow, because everybody will tell you that, because they see so much opportunity in this. Minimize or avoid debt. You don't need to spend a lot of money to start these operations. We're talking about hand tools. You know, the biggest investments are something like a walk-behind tractor and a walk-in cooler, and you can find all that stuff used. I started on $7,000, and I spent the time to find that right equipment, so I saved money doing that. So give yourself time and try to find ways to do it frugally. Get a return. Cash flow is key. Reinvest as you go. Resist the temptation to expand and because people will offer you money. I have people that have said, "Hey, I'll give you $100,000. You need to expand this, and I'll charge you barely any interest." But keep it small, because it's about quality of life. If you expand it so much and then you've got all these pressures, it just turns into a stressful situation really quickly. The other thing is be a news story, and so it's like the first mover advantage. A lot of people have a temptation to say, "Okay, I want to be an urban farmer. I'm going to move to the Bay Area, because that's where all the urban ag is." But that's a mistake, because if you go to the Bay Area, and please don't think that I'm not telling you to not go to the Bay Area to be an urban farmer. But if you go to the Bay Area to be an urban farmer, you're not the first guy to do it there, or girl. You're at the back. Go to a town where it's like 100,000 people or less, or around there, where nobody's doing this stuff, like Temecula. Who's doing it here? And find out what the demand is. Find out where your niches are. What do people want? Go to a place to be the first person to do it. We need to spread out. We need to get this stuff in every American city. Every city across the world, there's got to be one of us, because each one of you will inspire another 100. But if we're all in one place doing it, there's not going to be much attention paid to us. So you think of all those small newspapers and bloggers and TV stations and radio channels that are in these small towns. So you're going to be a news story. You go there, it's going to be, wow, look at this, what are they doing? So you're going to be that first person to do it. And that's going to pave just a wave of attention and success for you that you're just going to ride. And then you'll be a worldwide story. Who knows? But make it happen in a small place. And please, if you want to do this, just get started. That's really all it is. So if anybody wants any information about our farm, please, if you're interested in any of the stuff I've showed you today, sign up for my newsletter. I'll be releasing new products and videos. I run my own YouTube channel that has like how-to videos. Subscribe to that. Email me at curtis@theurbanfarmer.co and like our Facebook page. Thanks a lot.